So let's call this meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. and with that, I'd like to roll call.
Here. Here. And Rosenson here. Paul Pipus. Michael Schenkel.
Not here.
Terry Clark.
Not here.
Scott Samuels.
Here.
Stuart Wolf.
Here.
Dan Coco.
Here.
And 7 and 4.
Thank you very much, Ann. Okay, the meeting this evening was called at the request of Mr. Samuels, Mr. Wolf, and Mr. Coco. They wanted to have good and welfare first because a lot of people complain that they have to wait too long after the meeting to speak. So the first item on the agenda is good and welfare, and there's nobody on the sign-up sheet. So, I mean, do we have good and welfare?
You can't go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, right?
Good night, Jerry.
There's a sign-up sheet right here, sir.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jerry Muro. I'm just hoping that this meeting moves along pretty fast because I'd like to get home. I wouldn't want to miss a meeting. Yeah, I'd like to get home and hear our president speak at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much. I stated what's more important to me.
the next item on the agenda, at the suggestion of the directors who called the meeting, is the removal of lighting officers. I'll ask Mr. Samuels what his intention is since he made up the agenda.
Well, there were 3 of us that made up this agenda. I'll make that motion. I make motion to remove
Ladies.
the officers.
I don't know if that's working.
I make a motion that we remove the officers and reopen this.
I second the motion.
Do you have that?
I know.
Motion made by Terry Clark, by Dan Coco, to remove the officers of the board. Seconded by Mr. Samuels. Mr. Wolford. Well, you know that Mr. Schenkel is now president. Okay, we have a motion made and seconded to remove the officers of the board. Motion before the board is to remove all of the present officers of the board, made by Mr. Dan Coco and seconded by Mr. Wolf. Is there discussion by the directors?
Well, the reason why I think we should remove the officers is because right now, I believe that this entire village is on the verge of bankruptcy. And I think we're heading in that direction. And I believe that the current majority board members are not doing the right thing by the village. They're not cutting the budget the way they should. We should cut that budget way down, and they're not doing a thing. We could save $100,000 right away, and they're not doing it. So I feel that we need change. And if you feel that way, that's fine. If not, well, the board members will have to vote on it.
Is there any comment from the floor?
Yes, I'd like to say something. I think that we've had this leadership for almost 3 years, and things have gotten continuously worse. And we do need a change. One major problem we have, and we've had for the last 20 months, is that we don't have any committees. And the leadership has the authority to pick and appoint committees, but they've only peppered the committees with people who favor their side. And they haven't picked all of the haven't taken the opportunities to get talented people from within the village, because if they don't 9 members of the board, or the leading majority, are not enough to run this community properly. That's it.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Two questions. One,
So sorry.
Well, I concur with what Danny and Scott said, but adding to that, back in January '07, when we were elected, we made suggestions on how we can conserve money and what we can do. Everything is ignored. We also have emails. The emails state, and there are members of the majority board that sign them so they can't deny it, that whatever Scott and Stewart are for, we're against, no matter what it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
question for Mr. Coco, and then
Any other comments from the board? Any other comments from the board? Mr. Miro?
Yeah, Mr. Coco was president for about 3.5 or 4 months. I'm just wondering what he did to cut our budget during that time. Now that he thinks, I mean, we're in the same situation, only it's getting worse as the economy is getting worse, but he seems to have come up with the idea that nobody's doing anything. I was wondering what he did. And then I do also want to point out that Mr. Samuels was the chairman of the amendment committee in the recent past. So he was, we do have committees, and he was involved, but you know, he likes to be the chairman. In that case, he was, and he hasn't really volunteered his services unless he is in charge since that time.
All right, Mr. Miro, to answer your question, the circumstances are much more dire now than they were 3 or 4 months ago. Now they're going for an assessment in October that a lot of people really can't afford, and they're not going to pay it. And we're going to be in a deep hole, and they're probably going to stop paying their maintenance too, because now the banks are not foreclosing for 2 years, and they're going to just stay in there, and they're not going to pay anything. So we're in much more dire circumstances right now than we were 3 or 4 months ago.
But if you had started and set the budget in motion for cutting back, then maybe we wouldn't be in the dire situation.
Why didn't you
we are
suggest
now.
that, Mr. Miro?
Pardon?
Why didn't you
But
suggest
you're the
that?
president.
We talked,
You were the
we
president.
talked, and you never said anything.
This is getting argumentative.
Please limit your comments to questions and statements. We want to, in order to expedite this meeting, avoid the back and forth.
Kim?
So she was first, and then this.
Well, I'm not sure what Mr. Coco did to cut the budget, but one thing I know for sure he did not to cut the budget would waive an awful lot of fees that we could have been getting for the village.
Then,
All right, I'd like to answer that.
yes, we have, no, we don't have. to
I would
rebut
like to answer that, please.
everything. You don't have to rebut.
I would like to answer it, unless you don't want me to. You're the president.
Go ahead.
I waived a few fees for people that couldn't afford those fees. If they paid those fees, they were not going to pay their maintenance. That's why I waived the fees, and it was only for about 3 or 4 people. That was it.
I do not believe that to be true.
All right, well then you must have some evidence to that effect.
Okay.
So
Only
present it.
that I was on the committee.
Yeah,
No
that is
arguing, no
very-
arguing,
just
no
wanna
arguing. Marcy?
make your points.
During the time that you were president, were there anybody foreclosures that you were taking care of or who had not paid their maintenance?
We're trying to work out payment plans.
No, during the time that you were president, weren't there people who had not paid their maintenance for a number of...
Yes, there were, and they were all going to the attorneys, when a lot of them shouldn't have been going to the attorneys. They're only a month or so behind, and they were just being tossed to the attorneys. Then they had late fees that they weren't able to afford. They should have been put in the attorney's hands at that point.
So you're saying that when you were president, the maintenance, the people who did not pay were only a month or so behind?
A lot of them were, and the accounting was a mess, and some of the board members were even delinquent.
And I know it's happened to us as well, from the management company, because we have a lot of problems with this management company.
Right.
But getting back to that, I know for a fact that there are people here whose maintenance hasn't been paid for quite a while, so it has been longer than the time you were president.
That's true.
Would you agree?
But the management company was handling that.
Well,
And they were turning everything over to the attorney after a month or two instead of working on a payment program.
But the management company is in charge for us. However, we are a board here, and you're supposed to be on top of what's going on.
I want not an accountant.
You know what?
We
You
hired
don't
a
have
management company to do that.
You know what? You don't have to be an accountant. I take care of my own bills. I'm
Okay.
not an accountant, and yet I can tell you exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that should have been done here with the board. The board should be
Thank you, Marcel.
The board consists of more than just one person.
I don't want to tell what he wants. Thank you, but I can't say what I want.
I think people should know that the problem's much greater than what's known. People think maybe 20.
Use this mic. Terry, listen.
It's on. It works.
Okay. The problem's much greater than most people are aware of. Maybe people think there's 15 or 20, maybe 30 people that aren't paying their maintenance. I've looked it over. There's at least 130 people. Okay, 130 owners are paying nothing. And I went into the office several times and asked what could be done, what can be done, and the answer was really nothing. That's the answer I got. I did see recently a notice was put out that privileges would be revoked, but when I asked Howard point blank what he would do, he said he couldn't do that. So I don't know whether that's legal or not. I asked Howard if this was a suggestion of mine to have their parking space revoked, their privilege to be in the common ground. We're all paying for that. Can't be done.
No, you can't do that.
That's,
You're very far beyond the issue before the board right now.
well, the issue is 150 people aren't, 130 or 150 people. Let's let it be known that between 130 to 150 owners are paying nothing, have not paid nothing, and have no intentions of paying anything. It's not tenuous. People are looking surprised. That's what the event.
You're getting off the subject again, Jerry. We're talking about the officers.
I wanted it to let everybody know how many people are paying nothing.
I get it. Is there anybody else? Marvin?
I'd like to address one issue that you mentioned, Scott, and that's the lack of committees or the lack of people on committees. I don't think it has anything to do with the current majority of board members. It has to do with the lack of people who are volunteering. Several months ago, volunteers were called for several committees. There were extremely few people who stood up and volunteered. I don't think that has anything to do with the people who are for the majority.
Well, Marvin stated, you and Steve Sturgeon were long-term on the sales and lease committee. I considered that you two were the most knowledgeable on the committee. I know that you have problems with
That's off the
the
subject.
leadership that overruled your rulings on the committee, or your suggestions. There is the core of the problem. You're qualified, Steve is qualified, but you're not on the committee, and they won't let you on, like they don't let me on.
I think that was Dan Coco that
Yeah,
excused
right.
Martin the first meeting Martin was.
Come on, let's have some order here. Kim, please.
Thank you, Martin. Scott saying about the things, Dan was the one who released Martin.
Okay, well, you discussed everything, Michael. You're a little late there, aren't you? I said you're a little late. I think it's about time that we call for the vote.
But he had something to say.
We're going to call for the vote. Thank you.
What are we voting on?
The motion is to remove the present officers of the board of directors. The secretary will call for the vote.
No. And Rosenson, Paul Marcus.
No.
Michael Schenkel.
No.
Terry Clark.
Yes.
Yes. Scott Samuel.
Yes.
Stuart Wolf.
Yes.
Dan Coco.
Yes.
Francis Mesro.
No.
Yes.
You're the one that brought up the subject, your friend, Mr. Simon.
Motion is failed by a vote of 5-4.
You're so
You put
happy
it on
with
the
everything.
agenda.
I'm so glad.
Okay, so we don't have to consider electing two IB officers at this time.
What a surprise.
Stupid.
That's
It was for
what's
advertising.
called majority rule.
He's an advertiser.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is IB's delinquency problems. And on Friday, we had a meeting of a committee to consider hardship appeals from owners. who are delinquent would like to make payment arrangements, but for one reason or another have either been stymied or have not been able to set up long enough term arrangements with our attorney. So since the meeting was just Friday and we got this agenda very quickly, I put together a memo that I did not have time to give to the board of members before the meeting tonight, but I placed a copy on everybody's things, okay? At this meeting to consider the hardship appeals, the meeting was called to order on Friday at 2:01 p.m. Committee members present were Jerry Muro, Kim Smella, B. Zalowitz, and Francis Mesereau. Mark Jones was absent. He's got the flu. The committee reviewed each letter from the owners asking for assistance to get current on their payments to the village. In all instances, the accumulated late fees amounted to a large portion of the debt. It was the consensus of the committee that we should ask the board to waive the late fees, other than bank charges, and make long-term payment plans to cure the delinquencies. We would contact Attorney Bro, who is our collection attorney, to get his reaction. At the meeting, we mentioned the lack of volunteers for committees and my desire for a long time to put together a finance committee. And lo and behold, I had volunteers and took the opportunity to accept volunteers to the finance committee to help carry out the committee's recommendations and to help with our delinquencies. They are Jerry Muro, Michael Schenkel, Marvin Tao, Phoebe Cohen, and Mark Jones will also be asked to be a member, and I believe he has already agreed that he will work with the committee. The committee will choose its own chair and will meet as soon as possible. Prior to contacting Attorney Brown, Francis Mesereau discussed the current collection terms with our administrative assistant, Chanel. She advised that Attorney Brown would consider payment plans of up to 12 months only and would usually require, in fact did require, that the owners come up in advance with a lump sum to cover the accrued attorney fees. These fees vary in amount, and depending on the amount owed could be considerable. In the case of one owner recently who has asked us for help, the attorney fees are about $500. And the owners in distress can't meet this condition of coming up with this lump sum. So Michael Schenkel, who has been working with delinquencies for months and months and months, very closely with Attorney Brow and with AW, approached Mr. Brow about this, and Mr. Brow will cooperate. He's willing to waive a great portion of his attorney fees, up to $500, and will continue to arrange installment payments up to 12 months. The committee recommends, and I'll come to that. The committee recommends suspending adding on additional late charges once the payment plan is made. If, for any reason, there is a default in keeping up with the payment plan, the owners have to know that all accrued fees are going to be added back into the debt. So they must adhere to the installment plan.